All right, man. We should probably jump into Rick and Morty at some point. Before we do that, how about you just like give your background up until Rick and Morty?
So I didn't really know what I was doing with my life. I was a terrible student. I didn't do anything. It was before the era of even making any kind of videos I didn't really know how to channel my creativity. I mean, I would make like camcorder videos when I was like a younger kid. And then in high school, it was just getting high and skipping school and, goofing off with my friends. And I didn't really know I wanted to get into comedy. I thought I wanted to, maybe because I was drawing, get into cartoons or comic books or something like that. And then I just didn't have the discipline for that. And so it was after high school, I was barely graduated, barely got into community college, which turned out to serve me well for being a writer on Community. So, but I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then I somehow had an epiphany, which I'm going to reveal some biographical information. And go, well, that's not really an epiphany. I decided to do stand-up. Now, my dad owned a stand-up comedy club. So I was going to stand-up comedy clubs my whole life, and it's a huge comedy club. It's considered one of the premier clubs in the country. And so growing up, I got to see, Gary Shandling and Drew Carey, Ellen DeGeneres, Jim Carrey. I saw my 16th birthday with all my friends, and that was still one of the most mind-blowing experiences because it was pre-Ace Ventura, post In Living Color.
Wow.
So he was big, but he wasn't, as big as he would become in the next 10 years after that. And he was so quick. And so I remember we were all there, and I had one friend. We were like 16. So, of course, you've got friends of different ages. I had a 14-year-old friend who's very small, and it's an adult club, but I'm the owner's kid. So he gets up and he walks across to go to the bathroom, and Jim Carrey mid-bit just stops and goes, "Hey, mister, that fake mustache won't fool me." And it was just like the middle of his bit. He just like saw that kid and just like made... And then we all, my dad brought us back to the green room, shuffled us back there, and, opened the door, and he was just sitting there, just emanating energy. And he's like, "Hey, so it's your birthday?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Cool. You want to come back to my hotel room and watch some porno?" I was like, it was what you'd want from a meeting Jim Carrey. So anyway, so then I was like, I want to get involved in comedy, but this is pre any kind of internet video, YouTube or anything. And even I didn't know. All I knew how to do is edit camcorder to VCR.
Oh,
style.
Like dual VCR thing?
Yeah, so I wasn't really doing this. I'm like, well, stand-up is something where you can write comedy and then you can perform it and you get an immediate reaction. So I started doing that and doing the open mics. And then eventually I was like, okay, well, Detroit is not for me the place I want to find my comedy voice. So I moved to Chicago, which is a great transition city. And immediately I was watching these people on stage in Chicago, and just everyone was blowing my mind, just comedically. And so got involved in that scene, and I met a lot of people there who I probably should stop name dropping, but my comedy class at that time was like Kumail Nanjiani and TJ Miller, Pete Holmes, Kyle Kinane, Matt Bronger. These are all guys who I did open mics with. They started, so we all kind of became friends. And that was really my college, because I didn't go to college really. I went to community college for 2 years, and I transferred to Michigan State, where all I did is watch TV constantly and say, I just want to write a TV show. And specifically, I wanted to write an animated sci-fi comedy show.
Okay.
And this is before Futurama.
Dude.
So,
okay. So there's really nothing that existed in any way.
As far as that particular...
As far as something you aspired to.
Yeah, I mean, you're watching. I watched Conan and I watched old sitcoms at Seinfeld. And I'm like, I like this stuff, but I knew that I wanted something that was sci-fi, because I like sci-fi or genre, fantasy, something, but also comedy. It was like I had no clue I'd ever be involved in a show like that. Like Rick and Morty is literally the exact show that I was fantasizing about at 20 years old. And on top of it, to be able to do it with friends, as opposed to, let's say I got hired on Futurama, it'd be like, I'm getting hired on a Fox show because who knows? Either they loved my script and they hired me, or I worked my way up from my writer's assistant. But Rick and Morty is it's sci-fi, fantasy, comedy, and it's dark as my sensibility is, which Futurama never really was. As dark as I think ultimately I like to write. And than just doing it with your friends.
Yeah.
Which you have a rapport, you have an understanding. It's like being in a band. I hate using that metaphor. That's just, I actually like using that metaphor, but I feel like I need to say I hate it because it's like it might be perceived as pretentious. But it is, because you have a rapport with people as opposed to being hired and thrown into a staff where it's like, hey, where I assume we're all funny, professionally funny enough to be on the show, but I don't know what your sensibility is. So anyway, I think that's a long way of getting to how I got to Rick and Morty, which was
well, you got to college.
Yeah. So I
skipped how you actually got to Rick and Morty.
So then I was doing stand up in Chicago for 4 years, and towards the end of it, I was like, I want to make videos. And I remember, and I'm so, Guterman and I referenced him now twice, Dan Guterman, a writer, producer on Rick and Morty, and one of the biggest ingredients of making that show great in the last 2 seasons. We were talking about how we're both driven by proving to the world that we know what we're doing, but also being terrified of being exposed as frauds at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so we're angry. We're like, people are gonna respect us and validate that we know what we're doing and we're funny.
I'm legit. Yeah.
And so I saw this guy make a comedy video on the stand-up scene, like a video, which was relatively infrequent back then. And I watched it. I was just so angry. I was like, I'm gonna make a video 10 times better than that guy. And so I was waiting tables with a guy named Danny Jelinek, who's now a big comedy director. He directed like Children's Hospital, and I mean, he directs on Last Week Tonight. Is that what John Oliver's show is called?
That sounds right.
Okay, yeah. So he just directs tons of comedy. By the time we were waiting tables together, and we just hit it off, just joking around and riffing, like waiting tables together. And so I found out he's in film school, and like I said, up until that point, I'd only done VCR editing. So when he showed me how to edit on a computer, my mind was blown. I was like, well, you can just drag a song underneath this, and then I don't have to record a song in the background in a boombox. And so we made a couple of comedy videos together with a lot of these stand-ups. I gave Kumail Nanjiani his first role. In fact, I confirmed that. I hung out with him a couple weeks ago, and I was like, was Vive, this video Danny and I made, was that your first acting role? He's like, yeah.
Wow.
So you can look that up. Anyway, we started making videos together, and then I found out about Channel 101, which is this, should I explain what that is for your audience?
Yeah, people won't know what that is.
Okay, so it's still going after 15 years. So Channel 101 was started by Dan Harmon and Rob Schraub. Dan's the creator of Community and Rick and Morty, and Rob is a director who's directed a lot of stuff, also on TV, comedy stuff, and Sarah Silverman Show, co-creator. At the time, they were writing partners, and they were really feeling the futility of selling stuff. They'd made a show called Heat, Vision, and Jack, pilot with Jack Black that Ben Stiller directed, but Fox didn't pick it up. And I think it was crushing, and they were crushingly disappointing. They were selling all these shows and movies, but they weren't getting made. And they're like, what are we doing? We're just writing, and nothing is being seen by anybody. So they started Channel 101 just to make stuff, videos, in 2003 with their friends. And the framing device essentially is a film festival, but they would it was set up like it was a competitive TV network. So they would you'd make stuff, you'd submit it to the primetime panel. The primetime panel was the creators of shows that were currently in the screening, so that gave them the credibility to be judging over. But it's purely democratic. So what would happen is the creator, the 5 returning shows would be put up against 5 pilots, and then the audience would vote for their top 5 favorite shows among those 10. So you could get canceled and you could be off the primetime panel, and then a new person could get on. So it always was, people would say, oh, it's a conspiracy. They're going to put in shitty shows so that they don't have any competition.
Right.
But no, because anyone with a pure heart and soul, which Dan and Rob do have creatively, and most of us who became their peers that sort of came to Channel 101 have this too. It's like, you want the show to be good. You actually want to put stuff in there that's going to make you work harder. Mm-hmm. That's what made me better. When I moved to Chicago, I worked, the people in Detroit were comedy people in Detroit who were, if you're really serious, you move to Chicago, LA, or New York. So once I moved to Chicago, I was around people who were that much more serious. They pushed me harder. LA, same thing. And then you're in Channel 101 and you're watching, Justin Roiland's early stuff. A guy named JD Riznar did Yacht Rock. These people, everyone was getting better, and they were making you have to get better. And Dan and Justin at the time, and Rob, and at the time the Lonely Island guys had a show in there, who now Sarah Chalk was in their early stuff. And I was like, the girl from Scrubs. And now she's the voice of Beth, which is weird. So, Okay, I got to turn this off. This is Rob Schraub texting
Oh,
me. Not to name
whoa.
drop. So I moved out there because a friend of mine said, hey, you like that Heat Vision Jack pilot? These guys, they created this thing called Channel 101. And so I moved to LA specifically just to get on their radar and make stuff for that thing, because I watched the videos and I was like, this is exactly my kind of comedy. And so the first video I made, I submitted it and was rejected, and it was the most heartbreaking experience. And then I submitted another one and it got in, but it didn't get voted back.
Okay.
And so that's what happens. It just made you work harder. You go, oh, I got to make something even better now. And you have to it forces you to just keep working harder until you make something that the audience can't deny, And then when you do that, your peers will go, oh, hey man, at the screening, hey, nice video, it's pretty funny. And then eventually you're getting so good, they're like, you want to hang out? And then eventually you're getting so good, they're like, hey, we just got a TV show. You want to work on it? And that's basically how it all.
So that's how you're employed and you have friends.
Basically.
Congrats.
And listen, it's a curse and a blessing to have your employers also be your friends. Let me tell you.
Yeah, no, I know the feeling. So I think that you've done a bunch of interviews on Rick and Morty, and Dan and Justin have also done a bunch of interviews on Rick and Morty. I think what people listening to this will probably be most interested in is just the sci-fi elements, the random tech elements of it all. I was wondering if you could just explain where you get your ideas for stuff, or is it coming from sci-fi, fiction of the past? Are you just making stuff up? Where does it come from?
Definitely a big helping of fiction from the past. We, are all well versed in every iconic sci-fi genre movie and television show of the past 50 years. Okay, fine. Maybe not 50 years. Let's not. I've never seen a Lost in Space episode, but
25.
Yeah, and on top of that, one of our writers, Mike McMahon, seems to read every sci-fi book and graphic novel. And I watch a lot of TV and movies, and I read occasional sci-fi books, but he's like an encyclopedia of that stuff. So we'll be talking about all these ideas what if it's something like this? What if it's like this plot from this book combined with this episode of, I always give the example of the Total Recall episode from season 2 where the parasites are in the house with them. I think McMahon pitched that as, in Buffy the Vampire Slayer season 5, they introduced this character Dawn as her sister, and everyone's pretending. I mean, they're not pretending. They're treating her like she's always been there. And that as a viewer that she hasn't had a sister for the first 4 seasons. And so you find out the supernatural explanation for why that is. So I think that's where it started. And then we built on top of that a thing element, they're all trapped in the house and they're all suspicious. And then it was what if we do I think Guterman pitched the idea of, well, what if this is a way to do a clip show? So you're actually throwing to clips, but the clips themselves are not memories in the sense of a traditional clip show. They're actually part of the sci-fi. And so it ends up being a patchwork of different references that are hopefully combined enough so we're not doing a spoof of any one thing. What I would never want to do, not that we haven't, Anatomy Park is considered maybe one of the weaker episodes, at least by us, because it's just a Jurassic Park spoof meets a Fantastic Voyage trope spoof that's been done 1,000 times. And, we try to do a darker, weirder version of it, but that's not the most ideal episode. We want to really make it feel that the references are, if anything, hidden.
But then, okay, so for in the Total Recall episode, right? They ended up getting spotted because it's something they only have positive memories, something like that. Was that something you guys made up, or are you just
Yeah, that was one of those moments that, when you get to so far in a script and you're trying to figure out what that, I can't remember if that was the third act twist, I assume. Yeah. You're okay, what is going to solve this problem? And then that's just when good old-fashioned writing ingenuity comes in, And I don't remember who pitched it, but it was, the idea of you can identify the parasites because you only have positive memories of them, unlike your family you've had all the complicated emotional experiences with that we all have. But that's that example. That's the anatomy of that episode. But sometimes it's more like Morty Night Run was let's do a midnight run kind of road adventure, and we're not referencing Midnight Run. There's no that's clearly the Yaphet Kotto character, but he's green, wearing sunglasses with 3 eye lenses. But it's like it's the essence of that, you know. So yeah. Go on.
Yeah,
I don't want to ramble on too much.
I forget that. No, you're doing great. What's the title of the episode where it's like world within world within world within world?
The title is called. We don't have any consistent naming formula. A lot of times it's puns with their names of famous movie titles, and sometimes just completely. Oh, I think it's The Ricks Must Be Crazy.
That sounds right.
Yes, yeah. The microverse and the miniverse.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Where did that come from?
That Justin had this idea of that Rick had some machine that he would liquefy an entire civilization because it was the only way to create this incredibly delicious dipping sauce he loved.
The Mulan.
Not the Mulan sauce.
Okay.
This is way before the Mulan sauce. But it was something similar. It was like, you know, which obviously the common theme is that Justin is obsessed with these kind of random things, and then we just want to like capture that energy and put it in there. So it was just the idea of what could illustrate Rick's character better than he would sacrifice an entire civilization. One of the greatest inventions was creating complex life, because once you liquefied it, it just happens to be the most delicious recipe. So I can't remember. It was always they go in and a character comes out. I think we actually, for the final version, the character never leaves, but there's a version where they sort of the characters go in whatever combination in the earliest version, and then one of the people kind of comes out and is so from the point of view of the character coming out, it's like this is where the world of the gods, you know?
Yeah, I don't think they did.
We didn't do that, yeah, but that was a big element. But at some point early on in the writing of that, it felt a little too much like the episode of The Simpsons where Lisa's tooth becomes. It's a treehouse of horror where her tooth. I think Bart touches some petri dish that her tooth is in, and then the static electricity creates life, and then it has a little civilization, and to the point where like they get to the future, and now there's like nukes or spaceships flying around and attacking Bart. And it felt like it was a little too much like that. And I think also because we were doing the beats where Rick and Morty were traveling repeatedly throughout time periods. So they'd get to the medieval period, and it just sort of felt a little too like, oh, I get it. This is like our medieval period, but it's aliens in a jar. And, you know, it's trying to figure out how to get it. So we're doing something that hasn't been done by either Simpsons or South Park or Futurama, which is not an easy cone path, you know, whatever those highway cone paths when you're doing driver's training to weave through.
I've heard you guys mention that before, but like, do you have someone who has, whether it's like encyclopedic knowledge, or is there some like website where you're like plugging in the references you're using? Because it seems like impossible to avoid.
I think it is impossible to avoid, and we haven't done a good job all the time, because I remember we were doing the episode Lawnmower Dog, which had the Inception thing, and there's Scary Terry, who's the Freddy Krueger character, and we were way too far down the road, and Mike McMahon said, oh, you know, South Park did, you know, their Inception episode had Freddy Krueger, and we're like,
thanks.
That would have been good to mention yesterday. Adam Sandler, everybody. Adam Sandler impression. Yeah, but it's like, great. Now we're too far down the line to change it. And, you know, then you just feel like a hack. And none of us had seen it. And the thing is, I love South Park, but I can't watch every episode of that show.
Let alone remember everything.
Yeah.
I think it's just like, oftentimes when I'm working on creative projects, I'm just like, is this new? Or I like faintly remember it. Is it an exposure to something?
By the way, there's a feeling that I get that's a combination of self-loathing and what's the opposite of self-loathing?
Like confidence?
Self-confidence. But I'm trying to still make it negative, like self-glorifying. Where if I think I've come up with a really particularly brilliant idea, I immediately go, this had to have been done before. You know, and so, but there are actual websites of TV tropes and movie tropes you can look up, but I think it's almost, sometimes it's just too nuanced. Or like, how do you even describe this particular bit? You know, it's just so, and you know, the fact is, it's sort of like when they do these videos every now and then of comedians getting busted. Like, did Amy Schumer steal Louis C.K.'s bit? I don't know, because there's so much stand-up comedy being generated, and there's only so many ideas in the world. And I don't even mean there's only so many jokes. I mean, like people are always kind of landing on the same human thoughts about life, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, I could say we have never consciously ripped anything off, and you know, sometimes maybe it's to a fault where you're trying so hard to stay away from something that you're not having any fun.
Well, I was wondering about that with like, I mean, maybe not South Park or Simpsons or something, but like, you know, an older, you know, piece of fiction where it's just like, let's do something almost identical to it, but like basically add the Rick and Morty spin on top of it. And like that opens it up in a new way. Like, I guess you've sort of done that with a bunch of episodes like that are like throwbacks, but I wonder if it like goes more nuanced than that with like obscure stuff.
God, what was it? It was the one that first introduced the Council of Ricks. And it was called A Rick for Every Season or something like that. But that episode is, I think that it's one of the few episodes where, you know, actually, ironically, people did say, did you guys rip off the Council of Reeds, which is a storyline from the Fantastic Four, which is a bunch of Reed Richards from different parallel realities in the Marvel Universe formed a Council of Reeds. No, we didn't know about that. But it's also an obvious place to go with Rick, but more importantly, the story itself around it just felt like a movie compressed in a 22-minute episode. It was like more like not really a familiar story, but like this is like kind of a classic. This is a mystery. It was a mystery episode. It was like who they were investigating. You know, Rick was trying to clear his name, so that was a Rick and Morty take on a mystery. You know, I'm trying to think of examples of movies. You know, The Fugitive. You know what I mean? That's a movie or a show before that about a guy who's trying to hunt the real killer of his wife while he's being pursued by the authorities. So that was the Rick and Morty take on that trope, or genre or subgenre. And I think that's because I didn't even think of that as being a Fugitive spoof, because it wasn't. It's like you said, it's like the Rick and Morty take on a classic.
Yeah, I mean, it's like how many movies are just like, you know, recomposed Greek myths, right? And just like, well, it's sort of the same thing, but not really at all.
Yeah, we do a episode in season 3 it's not a spoof of anything in particular, but we started referencing very specific movies, and we're like, well, this is okay, and I'm going to try to weave through this without spoiling anything. It's like, you know, 127 Hours is, I think I might even talk about this Comic-Con, so it's actually probably okay to talk about. But there's an episode where Rick turns himself into a pickle, and it's the only other footage that's shown. They showed it after the premiere of episode 1 of season 3. So that's not a spoiler.
Okay.
Rick turns himself into a pickle. But what the episode's really about is he turns himself into a pickle, and then he sort of gets trapped, and he ends up involved in a situation. One twist leads to another, and he's totally screwed. And he doesn't have the same resources that he usually has access to. He's a pickle. He's not himself. He can't reach into his lab coat and pull out his portal gun or any of his other infinite inventions he has hidden in there. And yet he's in the most mundane of circumstances. He's just on Earth. He's a few hundred feet from the house. He's not, but he's a pickle. So he has to figure out how to get himself out of that with really basic ingenuity. And so we kept talking about 127 Hours or Gravity, like these movies about characters that are just in these situations that they are alone, and they have to figure out, you know, what do I do to get out of this? And so that was a great, once again, to do the Rick and Morty version of what that subgenre is. I don't even know what that subgenre is called. The survivalist subgenre?
Room escape type deal?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And so then, so all the gadgets, you talked about the portal gun and stuff, like, you know, the aliens have random gadgets. When they go to a different world, everyone's got different like weapons that they attack them with. Where does all that stuff come from?
Well, that I know. I mean, you know, the first example that pops in my head is I think that Justin wanted to base the Citadel of Ricks off of something from Halo. I'm not a huge video game person. He is. So there's some big spaceship Citadel thing in the game Halo. And so a lot of times the elements of the planets or the technology will be, you know, straight up visual references like, oh, this is this is like a gun from this movie. I'm not a big tech person. I never thought about this until just now, but I've never really cared that much about what the tech looks like. As long as it, you want to make sure kind of everything feels and looks different and there's a flavor to it. But I'm pretty into the alien design, so I've gotten involved. I've talked to art directors and character designers and been like, all right, this alien has to look like this. If it looks like this, it's not going to work. It's not going to be as funny. If it looks like this, it's got to look like it's got to be like you got to take it seriously, or it's from this kind of planet, so it's got to have these specific anatomical features. And it's true, like I mean, it's so funny though, because there's been so many times when, the Meeseeks is a perfect example. I feel like I've talked about this. I'm so sorry if anyone who's watching this is like, I have already heard this anecdote.
Anyone who's heard this before is going to want more. Like, they want it again.
But the Meeseeks, I wrote that episode. And when I say I wrote, it's such a collaborative effort. My name was on that script, but, we all sort of write a little bit of everything. So, and Dan does so much of the final dialogue passes and stuff. So the Meeseeks started out as, this voice, this concept that Justin pitched. And then I wrote the episode, and I wrote the episode script, and I still, in my head, pictured them as tiny little, for you at home, creatures like the size of Smurfs or something.
Okay.
And Justin, and it was, I'm not kidding, it was the blue dress, gold dress of the writer's room, because half the people reading the same script and crew imagine them life size, and half imagine them as tiny little gremlin things, or smaller than gremlins. I guess the script was written in a way we never really thought about their scale, So there's a scene where Jerry and Beth are in the restaurant and they all bust in, and I remember thinking like, oh, that it'd be funny if they're like on the table, like 3 apples high, like in Jerry's face with a gun, and everyone's like, no, it's like a life-size, human-sized 6-foot person with a gun. I was like, well, that's gonna be terrifying. So anyway. It's those conversations, though, that are important, because you're like, it's a very different concept if they were Smurfs versus what they ended up being, And then on top of that, you have just, what do they look like? Are they complex? Are they simple? Are they blue? Are they monochromatic?
So how do you decide? How do you decide for the 6-foot Meeseek versus the the little Munchkin version?
Lots of debate.
Yeah,
lots of debate. Yeah, you got to discuss it, and like I said, it was so evenly divided that it wasn't like just me fighting for them being small. It was like other people too. And then, eventually you figure out what's the best way. And like every other argument we've ever had, eventually the episode gets finished and made and it comes out, and then you just kind of forget about all the problems. Like, that would have been better if they were 2 feet high. But then you're like, years go by, you're like, who cares? No,
Well, it's the thing that like someone watching it can't know. I mean, maybe now they can know, but yeah. Have you ever done like I don't know if it's like a director's cut animation where you're like, I kind of wanted him to look like this, so can you edit that in and then throw it in as an extra? Like Well, there's been lots of storyboarding that we've redone and revised, and that's what ends up getting us in trouble. Is we'll because it's animation, we'll be like, we're going to rewrite the script and you can redraw it. It's not a good thing to do because we're not a Fox show with unlimited, or at least near unlimited funds. So there's lots of stuff that we've had that's like totally alternate versions of scenes there. And the premiere of season 2, which is a really just soul-crushing, heartbreaking episode to break that no one has ever been ultimately satisfied with its final result, that we kept revising and changing, and we could never really land on what the logic of that episode was. It was the one where the things keep splitting. Yeah, and so it's like a split screen episode, and we just could never figure out what the logic was, because at the end of the day, admittedly, unlike Futurama, none of us on the staff we're barely educated. We're not mathematicians. We don't really know that much about science. We're writing from the point of view of tropes and genre stuff, and we want to tell good stories. We're more scientists of story, if you will, as opposed to like, we don't really know how any of this shit works. We should get a science advisor. So that episode, we at one point, there's a whole running thing where Morty had gone and gotten some point shorts, and no one calls attention to it because the world has been frozen between season 1 and season 2, and so you find out that they've just been running around having fun, looting
department stores, and Morty at some point grabbed short shorts. And he's walking around, and at one point Rick starts leaning into him, berating him, and he points out the short shorts and starts roasting him about the short shorts. Like, what is this, the new look for season 2? And starts breaking the fourth wall. You're hoping that you get one of these limited edition alternative action figure with short shorts, Morty? Like, just starts, which I love, by the way. I think that's one of the funniest parts of the show is that you can weave in and out of the fourth wall, but you're still invested in the story. But anyway, not that that scene ended up being in the air, but it's on the DVD, I think. And yeah, and by the way, even more of that in season 3. There's like, we rewrote some episodes so much that there's animatics that are like so different than the final product.
Yeah, well, that's what I was wondering. I mean, like, season 3 isn't out yet, but except for the first episode. I was wondering if you could jump into that. Like, what can we expect? Like, what kind of weird things are coming up without revealing everything?
What I like about the show, and from a broad point of view personally, is that people seem to be invested in the reality of the show. In other words, people are wondering about certain characters. Oh, when is that person going to come back? What's happening with that character? And the fact that anybody cares about characters that were introduced once in season 1 and like intriguing ideas like the eye patch Morty, who's the evil Morty, what it was, that character going to come back. In season 3, I think that we stay true to the idea of the world is real. There are consequences. At the same time, we're going to have lots of one-off things, but there's consequences both. I mean, you saw it in the first episode that they get divorced. That has consequences that play out through the whole season. But there's also consequences that are outside of, some of the stuff that you've seen already is going to play out more in season 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So along those lines then of like random things that like maybe get addressed, maybe don't get addressed. I have a question from another YC person, Kat Minyalik. Her question is, can you make Roy the game?
Can we make it?
Will you make it?
Will we, the writers of an animated comedy show, create a virtual reality simulation? Can we get funding for it? I think is the question to your viewers.
I mean, maybe we could figure it out.
Maybe we already have, and that's what this is.
Oh, shit. We're in Roy. What was the second one? Dave?
Well, we're in Ryan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. What was the second one called? I think I might have pitched that joke, whatever the Roy sequel was called.
I think it was Dave or David or something like that.
Yeah. So the answer is no, because we're incapable of that. But also, maybe we already have. Yeah, I think in the virtual reality game, Virtual Reality, I think it's called. I think Justin told me there's an Easter egg where you play a knockoff version of Roy. Oh. It sounded hilarious. I played some of that game, but I didn't get this far. You find like a bootleg Roy, and then you're playing a virtual reality game within a virtual reality game, because it's the virtual reality Rick and Morty game.
So I get, just like, we should step back and explain what the actual Rick and Morty virtual reality game, because it just came out, right?
Yeah, yesterday.
Yeah.
That's a game where it's a virtual reality game where you're a clone of Morty. So when you appear in the game, you're in the garage, and Rick and Morty are standing there and yelling at you, and then you do different things, and obviously it's somewhat limited in where you can go. It's virtual reality, and you can't just run around, but you go to like different worlds. I think you can teleport to 3 or 4 different worlds. You can go in the house, which is pretty mind-blowing because it's weird. I remember I played the level, or Justin put me into the scene in the house, and I'm like, this is the house? Like, this is the living room? This feels so weird. Like, I'm not used to experiencing it from that perspective.
That's so funny. Was there like any like disconnect between like the house you imagined writing and the virtual reality house that's been created?
Well, the disconnect is pretty great because Justin pointed out something, because you're standing in front of the TV, and so the couch is behind you, and then let's say the TV's this way, to my left was the sliding glass door, which I know we've used a lot. The party episode takes place in the house, but never really thought about it. And Justin says, this is Mike Chillian's parents' house. Like that sliding glass door and the way it looks outdoors. I never would have thought. That's a friend of ours. He also happened to be the character designer of the pilots. We actually designed a lot of the original characters. But I never would have thought that until I was physically in the space, and I looked over and I'm like, oh my God, that is Mike Chillian's parents' house. Like, I totally see it now, but I never would have thought of that watching it. I mean, I forget what color hair Beth has. Like, in my mind, for some reason, she's a brunette, and I always forget that she's a blonde because most of my experience of the show is in my head. I don't consume it as much as some people do because sometimes I don't even watch the final episodes, you know?
I believe it.
I'm like, and if anything, I'm watching most of them when they're in the animatic stage, when they're all black and white. So sometimes I actually forget what the characters look like what their outfit, Rick's color palette. Like there's a joke in the first episode where he says, I used to wear blue pants. And then to write that joke, which McMahon did, like, I think we had to look at Rick and Morty on a sheet of paper and be like, oh, okay, so he has brown pants, I think, a blue shirt, a white lab coat. And then even like when Rick takes his shirt off, like what he looks like underneath blew my mind once. I was like, oh God, what is he?
Oh yeah. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, that's a good point. So, okay. So the Roy thing is an Easter egg in virtual reality, virtual Rickality.
I think that's what it's called.
Okay.
If I know how we name our property, our titles, yeah.
I think so, because then there's like the Instagram thing that Rick's diverse.
Yeah.
What about the other game? Like I played some of the other ones, the other games. Like what has just like caused you guys to like jump into all these random digital property things?
Well, that's not us.
Is this Adult Swim?
Yeah, I think they're driving it. I mean, I certainly, I don't. I was sort of involved. I consulted a little bit on some of the web content that bridged season 2 and season 3, which is out. The thing where it's like a website that's in theory you're kind of it's the Galactic Federation's website.
Okay.
These guys, Carrot, I think the company's called, they did a bunch of content for that. I think they also designed the Rick's Diverse, but that's like driven by Adult Swim and whoever they subcontract. Okay. Yeah. We've had more direct say on the DVD special features and a little bit. Justin oversees some of the merchandise, like what the figures are going to be or look like, or the toys or pitches for ideas for what they could do, for different kinds of stuff that I may or may not be able to talk about. But I had a lot to say personally on some of the DVD stuff. Like I remember for the season 2, there's a lot of debate about what the little thing that we're going to have in the season 1. It was the Jack Chick track, which is from the Council of Rick's episode, or there's the Good Morty Jack Chick track. So we just printed up real ones and put it in. And then for the second one, we really had a long conversation about what should it be, and we finally landed on, well, it should be a Plumbus instruction manual, and then we should do the joke should be in some alien language first, and then we're usually Spanish or French would be as the English translation. Okay. So, yeah, but nothing. I haven't had a lot to say about other stuff, or certainly I can't speak for what Justin and Dan have been saying.
And that's true for the VR game too, because I figured like you just have this room of nerds, and they're like, oh, we should make a VR game, like the accounting game too. I was like,
Alchemy.
Yeah.
Oh no, wait,
accounting.
that was Justin.
It was Justin's accounting thing, right?
Yeah. I was getting confused because the guys who created the Rick and Morty VR game did a job simulator, so I was But accounting was Justin's project with the guys who did the Stanley Parable.
Okay. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they did that in like a week, the initial build of that. But anyway, I wish I was more involved in the Rick and Morty virtual reality game because I do have one nit to pick with it. And I think I maybe I'm being a dick, but because the guys did a great job, the Alchemy guys. And I think they kind of just created that from scratch. Like, Justin, I'm sure, riffed a lot of the dialogue because that's what he does and he's great at it. But I think they conceived the whole game, and they did such a great job. But maybe I shouldn't even say this. But my one beef with it was like, because you're a clone Morty that keeps dying, and then you go to a limbo, and then you can push a button and get respawned. I was like, dude, why wasn't it a Meeseeks? Because then he could be destroyed or whatever, fulfill his purpose, and therefore die. And then you're instead of limbo or hell or whatever, you're in the Meeseeks box, and we could actually depict what that would look like, which could be, I would have loved to have pitched that because that could have been so cool. It could have been like a Doctor Who thing or like a Hellraiser, like, just bizarre imagery of what a Meeseeks box looks like, but that's just me as a writer, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know like what makes the most sense from a video game point of view,
I mean, I imagine people want to be Morty. Right, like when they're playing a game.
Well, but you're not. You're still interacting with Rick and Morty.
That's true.
You're a clone Morty, so you don't actually even talk.
Oh,
so but they did incorporate these things called U-Seeks, which are these Meeseeks that are involved. So Meeseeks are in the game, but I was just
Okay.
That's just me putting
Sorry,
my
man.
writer hat on, and I don't want to tell anyone how to do their job, certainly. And I think those guys did a great job, but that was my one thing. I'm like, that would have been so cool because I think that what's fun about anytime you do content like a video game is being able to actually show other aspects that the show might not show. Mm-hmm. The show is more, we've talked about how we'd bring back Meeseeks, and if we want to really, if we're going to bother do it, we want to really explore a different aspect of it. But that's one way to do it right there, is show what the inside of the Meeseeks box looked like. That would have been really cool.
Fair enough. So what else are you working on now that like Rick and Morty season 3 is all written, squared away? What's coming up for you?
Just developing some stuff, trying to get my own show. You know that expression, it's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven?
Nope.
Oh, that's one of my favorite expressions. It means that, would you rather be a servant in one of the best shows on TV, or would you rather be in charge of a show that nobody cared about?
Oh, so what show that nobody cares about are you working on?
I've got a few different ideas. I'm trying to crack. Writing is hard, man. It's writing a pilot it's hard because it's just nothing, and then you have to figure out how to make it something. Coming aboard any TV show, I came aboard Rick and Morty after the pilot. So at least I sort of understood. We're still figuring out those characters, by the way, even to the season 3. But there's something that you can start playing with, which means, like I love writing Morty when he's angry, because it's just so funny to write him like really angry and pissed off at Rick. And that's because a lot of times he's not. He's early on, he was like, whoa, sort of low status, and now to actually put him in a high status position where he's like reading Rick the Riot Act is fun. But that's only fun because you're twisting the convention around. When you're trying to come up with something from scratch, it's like, what's the convention, let alone how do you twist it? So that's a long way of saying that I'm just, I'm developing a few different shows and seeing what sticks.
Wow, that's a metaphor I have heard before.
What's that? Yeah,
that's a metaphor I have heard.
Throwing a lot at the wall and seeing what sticks. That's
what about
based
your
on spaghetti.
Thanks, man.
That's what sticks.
If I learned one thing today.
Yeah.
What about the all your YouTube ideas?
Oh boy. Okay, so I want to start a YouTube channel. Well, honestly, okay, here's the sincere answer, because I don't have any ambitions to make a career out of YouTube. But what would be nice is that, I'm starting to get those email requests about, hey, I'm a writer, what can I do? I'm like, I can't really give any advice, because as I already laid out, it's so hyper specific and right place, right time, and it is for everybody. But I don't know. I was thinking about maybe making videos, just sort of talking about different things. I like to live stream, and so just kind of having fun, and not worrying about something being good enough to make money off of, that's what happens when you're developing a TV show. From my perspective, is like, is this going to sell? Is this going to make money? It's like, what if you just were creative and didn't have to worry about that? So, but the other thing I want to make videos is about climate change, because I want to really figure out how I can like
a serious, maybe comedy, but like with a real purpose. Is that what you're saying?
To finally expose the myth that is climate change, that it's a hoax and that the government is just trying to tax us all until, I'm a climate change denier.
No, that's good. I'm a flat earth guy. So go for it. Yeah. Here's your pedestal.
Well, I'm totally, that's my big issue. I'm obsessed with it. And to be clear, I was joking. I'm obsessed with finding a solution to climate change, which starts with acknowledging that it's real. And so, but I'm like, I'll join these organizations and I'll go and I'll be like, this is great. And I love to, I'd love to table and volunteer and march, but like, is that really the most impactful use of my skill set? So I'll like watch some videos online that are anti-climate change. And I'm like, the ones that are pro-climate change are usually pretty dry. And I'm like, maybe I can make something somewhat entertaining. I don't know. That's my little dream I have.
All right.
Using my communication skills and comedic abilities to do my little part to save this little blue dot.
Well, this has been awesome. It was really great.
You got everything you needed?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, are there any words of wisdom you want to share for people who aspire to be Rick and Morty type writers? Or do you just not reply to those emails? Or
I'm not great at it. But I have replied to him a couple of times and said, because the problem is that like I'll get a Facebook message or an Instagram message or a Twitter DM, and I'm like, I just forget and lose track of everything.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I will say that I think now is such a weird time because Dan and Justin and I are all within the same sort of age range, and man, we grew up in a world where all we wanted was superhero movies and sci-fi shows, and they were so few and far between when we were teenagers. And so now we're living in a world where like that's everything, and we're able to do a show where we can take all of that and just like run it through a filter and put it on TV. So if you're a genre fan, I can't tell if this is like the best time to be a genre writer, creator, aspiring, or the worst time, because it's like you could say it's the best time because people are more open to that now, but it almost might be the worst time because it's so saturated.
Well, I think the core idea is actually really interesting, which is like make the stuff that you really want. Because like, I mean, it's like basically your generation that's allowed that to happen, right? So it's like,
Thank you. We are pioneers.
You're amazing, man. But you know what I mean, right? So it's like if you're 15 now, like you just make the stuff that like you really want to make, and like hopefully eventually people are into it.
Yeah, and that really is that's the number one advice, is just make the stuff that you want to watch, and you really have to just make it for an audience of one, and of course hope that ends up resonating with an audience of millions, because that's how you make money. But and it's hard because it's like there's ideas I have for shows, and I'm like, this is the kind of show that I've never seen before, which means it's terrifying because you're like, how do I explain this to somebody? But if I can execute it properly, then it's a show that's never been seen before, and that could be great. It could also be a total failure, but it could be great. At least it's a risk that could pay off. So yeah, I think that's the important thing is just making stuff just for yourself. And when we made season 1 of Rick and Morty, no one knew what the show was or cared what the show was. So we're just like making ourselves laugh, And then we had no clue it was going to be. We're like, well, it's an Adult Swim show, so like it'll be as popular as an Adult Swim show is going to be, And somehow it's really struck a chord that I'm just shocked by, because the fact that the McNugget sauce became a thing that was like
ridiculous.
The fact that I see like celebrities wearing Rick and Morty T-shirts, I'm just like, what is going on? It still feels like just a group of friends who have been doing this stuff. Like I said, we've made stuff for free for ourselves. Yeah. We made a podcast, made a web series that nobody paid for, that we're just like, whatever. And to actually make something that people see and, is we're making a living off of is pretty crazy.
Have you been able to like discern why it has such an outsized impact for like just this random show?
Yeah, well, no, I've really tried to figure it out, because I thought, well, I mean, I think Dan's a visionary, brilliant creator and writer, and so I think it's no surprise that anything he writes is going to resonate. At the same time, I thought, well, but clearly it's a combination of that and Justin's voice, which I remember from the second I saw Justin on camera, which was live action, not even animation, back in 2004 at Channel 101. I was like, that guy's hilarious. His voice is hilarious. I want to work with that guy. And so I thought, well, it's that combination of that je ne sais quoi of his voice, if I may, with Dan's writing. But then again, it's popular internationally in Russia and all these other countries where it's just dubbed over with not just in the voice. So it's like, is that it's the Rick character is just one of those characters, like, I don't know, like a Cartman or can't think of other examples where you're just like, that guy fucking says the shit I want to say, but I'm not smart enough or ballsy enough to say it. So it's really just a cathartic kind of character. And then it's a family show, so that appeals to people because I think it feels somewhat like a real family as opposed to maybe a Family Guy, which you're like, I don't know, they're just characters bouncing off each other. This actually plays on real family dynamics, and then it's just also pretty to look at because the animators and the artists and the crew, finally I'm stopping focusing on what the writers do. They do such a good job. The directors and everybody, it's just so... I watched the first episode of season 3 like so many times, not because I was so in love with the writing or the jokes, but I was like, man, this is just so visually beautiful. So it kind of covers a lot of demographic voting blocks, if you will. It was a candidate, it would do really well in the polls.
I guess the last question that I have about that is, what's the deal with the pupils? Like the hand-drawn, not circular.
That's absolutely Justin's signature aesthetic, because I think from the early days of his cartoons, he did that.
Oh, I haven't seen those.
You never seen House of Cosby's?
No.
Oh my God.
Sorry.
House of Cosby's was what put Justin Roiland on the map. I'll never forget. It was January 2005, Channel 101. When that thing debuted, it blew the roof off the place, which was the opposite reaction of my show, Jack Everlasting, which kept the roof firmly on. In fact, you might even say it sucked the air out of the room. But yeah, it's a show where a guy clones Bill Cosby, and it's hilarious.
All right, so if people want to like pay attention to what you're up to, how can they follow you on the internet?
Hit up at Ryan Ridley at Twitter, Ryan Ridley at Instagram. I do live streams pretty regularly. I'm the
yeah. What is the
hold on? I
comparison?
branded myself Chuck Lorre of live streaming because I have about 10 to 15 live streaming shows. I do a show called I Don't Feel Like Writing Today, which is a show that I do whenever I don't feel like writing. I do a show called Law and Abed, where my friend Abed Gaith, who's the basis of the Abed Nader character in Community, talks to me about some of his legal situations. And I learned about the law that way. I do a show called Late Night with Ryan Ridley, which when I just can't sleep, I just start, live streaming. So anyway, that's a real fun time. And also, I'll answer questions about Rick and Morty or writing or whatever. I don't know.
That's
Twitter,
perfect. We shouldn't have even done this
Instagram.
podcast. I should have just gotten you on the live stream. All right, man. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Done.
All right.